listeners, and welcome to Get Smartr, an LCE podcast. This is a new podcast. This is our first episode. And here with us today is Paul Borders. Paul is a senior principal consultant with Lifecycle Engineering. Paul, thank you so much for joining our first episode.
Certainly good to be here.
Yes, you've been with Lifecycle for over a decade, and I've known you for that long. Right. And I've seen firsthand how you've transformed organizations and helped them see and live the value of operational reliability and smart culture. But I've never asked you in all these years, when you were a plant manager, because you came to us from industry, can you recall an experience where you reached a turning point that it changed your mindset about how your plant was running? You knew things had to be different.
Oh, there was an absolute milestone event. Probably in my first year of being a plant manager, I faced failure directly. I had been exposed to the principles of reliability in probably the past 4 years before I became a plant manager, and I was absolutely dedicated to making my plant become highly reliable. But in the very early days, I thought I could just sort of sprinkle a little bit of reliability around, right? And
like pixie dust.
yeah. So there was a day that I had taken lunch early, and I was coming back into the plant, and I was greeted in the parking lot by my procurement leader, and he said, "Things are really rough out in the production area." He said, I think you probably need to go check in with the team back there. And so instead of going through the main aisle, I went around the side of the building and went in the employee entrance. And this was right at lunchtime. And it was also right at shift change. So people were coming out and also people were coming in. The first thing that really hurt my feelings, really, for lack of a word, was I saw the people that were leaving the plant interacting with the folks that were coming in. And it was not, "Hey, Joe," or "Hey, Bill." It was more like, "This monster has been kicking my butt for the last 12 hours, and now it's time to get a piece of you." And people weren't excited about going into work. And I was just really disheartened that the morale of the departing crew was so low. And as I went on through the employee entrance and I walked across a few production bays, I could see the production arena lit up like a Christmas tree. There was red lights everywhere and forklifts pulling out scrap, and half the lines were down. And it was just a three-ring circus, and certainly not an environment that I was proud to be at the helm of. And in that moment, I had a full-blown anxiety attack. And I had the sort of classic falling backwards through space feeling. And I realized in that moment that my reliability implementation wasn't going to be about sprinkling a little bit of reliability around, but it was going to be about some heavy lifting from a leadership standpoint. There were people on the team that I knew weren't going to make the journey. There were people that I knew that I had to bring into the environment to help us get there faster. And there was going to be a different level of pursuit necessary to make my plant highly reliable. And in that sort of emotional platform, I started acting differently. And it's because I think I was, really genuinely concerned that I was going to fail. Like this operation is not going to become highly reliable. And I just was convicted that there was going to be lots of tough leadership required to sort of get us out of the ditch that we were in. So
thank you for sharing that, Paul. That's such a epiphany, that you had, that okay, now's the time. I'm convicted of this. I really appreciate you sharing the story. You're one of our instructors at the Lifecycle Institute. We call them facilitators. And when you teach courses or when you're working on site with our customers, I've heard you describe that the transformation, that you were just alluding to, from a really reactive, a chaotic state of operations to reliable, stable, and efficient, effective operations as like a journey or more phases than a set of steps. Step 1, 2, 3. Could you just tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that? What you mean by that journey?
Yeah, this work is not like a project where you have 3 days of foundation prep and then you pour the concrete and then you erect the
Right.
walls. This is really social systems and leadership engineering, and people move at different cadences, and they have different levels of speed that they're capable of moving at. So I tend to, as I've worked with a lot of different places, I tend to think of these phases or maybe seasons, if you will, that plants typically go through. I would say in the first season, it's really where you're just simply trying to generate awareness
Mm-hmm.
that this initiative is being undertaken. Manufacturing organizations are complex. Sometimes they are over 30 or 40 acres, and there's the night shift, and there's the back crew, and there's the machine shop, and then there's
Right.
the thing. So the organization is quite fragmented, and it is a real challenge just to get receptivity that things are changing in the organization. And a lot of people will really try to do a bare bones thrifty job of this, and they'll order some banners and put them over the main aisleways, or they'll print some coffee mugs or t-shirts and hand them out. But what we're really talking about is communicating to folks like what is changing, right? Why are we changing, and what are the consequences if we don't change? And many of the sites that we work with are in peril. They're either commodities are very low, or there's tons
Right.
of risk in the organization. So most of them typically have a burning platform, but to get that communication message across to the 500 or 600 people that are at the plant is a real challenge. I would say that there is a continuum of trust in these organizations, where in a really healthy organization where there's high levels of trust, people will be quite optimistic and quite encouraged by the fact that they're moving down the reliability road. But there's also places that have really been poisoned, if you will, from failed past attempts to change. They've
Right.
seen the coffee mugs and the t-shirts get printed before, and leaders saying the same thing, that and really, so overcoming that pessimism or skepticism, maybe is a better
Skepticism.
word, is a really big challenge. There are some communication obstacles that are out in place. People generally need to hear things from at least 3 different sources before they start to believe it. So if a supervisor says something, it just disappears into the wake of information. But if they hear it from a supervisor and maybe an announcement on an electronic media, or if
Mm-hmm.
they also see a mention of it in the annual report, or if there's an executive visit and he has a town hall,
A
and
town
he
hall.
mentions
Right.
then people will start to, again, it starts registering that, oh, we're going to be doing something different here, and we're going to be implementing this reliability work. So that first season, candidly, is a communication awareness challenge. It's not easy. You will feel like a parrot, repeating the same messages time and time again. But it's really around generating awareness of what the organization is taking on. So once the leaders in the organization effectively get these messages across, you really start to dovetail, and it's not a single day. Again, it's more of a season. But there's a next phase, really, where you're starting to generate context for people, because they're going to be getting lots of technical information and other things. So you're starting to generate context for the bits and pieces that are going to be related to how they're doing their job.
Mm-hmm.
So providing education is a huge aspect of this season, because people in these organizations that are highly reactive, they're quite skilled, but the skills are not necessarily in the vein that we need them to be, right? So
Right.
they can light a fire under something, they can generate a sense of urgency, they can deploy resources rapidly, they can get parts air freighted in on FedEx custom critical. But the knowledge, skills, and abilities to generate this work is very different. It's much more proactive, it's much more future focused. So it's really developing those knowledge, skills, and abilities that are going to be required as they move into a different realm where things like planning, high quality jobs are important, and scheduling out 2 to 3 weeks out is going to be much more valued. So this is typically quite a difficult phase because bandwidth is at such a premium for the people. You know, typically the plant is huffing and puffing like a bad storm, and people are very asset committed to keeping things rolling. And so attendance at these training sessions is sometimes a challenge. Sometimes it's a challenge even to get a quorum for the number of people to pull off the training that's done, because somebody's fighting a battle out on line
Right.
number 6. All right. But you know, just those basic things like getting training and getting coaching sessions done. But at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is generate context, and we're also trying to generate the education that they're going to need to be able to practice the aspects of reliability.
Right. Give them the competency, give them the ability, give them the room.
I would say that the next season is a bit more leadership focused, and that is really a season where the bar is raised on performance expectations. All right. So in the first phases where you're generating awareness of what's occurring and you're doing training, it feels to people like it's sort of out in the future. But we move into this phase where the bar is raised on performance expectations. It's really sort of, okay, the rubber is now meeting the road, right? We've given you the knowledge, skills, and abilities. You know that we're on a journey. It's now time to start practicing these processes. We need you to get competent and capable at them. So, and I say this is a difficult time because many managers and many leaders in the organization are hesitant to generate any conflict, right? So they'll shy away from coaching, they'll shy away from insisting that processes be done. So it's a time where we've really got to work with leaders to say, hey, the processes are just ink on paper, right? And we now have to turn them into behaviors in the people that we're dealing with. And people don't develop those neural networks in their brains unless they're really held to task. Some folks pick it up very quickly and eagerly, but the vast majority of folks generally have to be coached and encouraged to start practicing the reliability processes consistently. So if you have a group of leaders that are very reluctant to directly interface and directly coach and pay attention to detail, this can be a difficult time, because we're essentially asking the leaders to bring about a different set of leadership than they have previously. And I would tell you that some folks don't make it in this period.
Wow.
Some folks are maybe close to retirement, and they personally don't have the energy for the initiative. There's other folks that are extremely excited, and you just have to get out of their way. But there definitely are some folks that really don't have the leadership competencies to sort of usher their people through this change period. And so that very naturally, that time period where leaders start to raise the bar on performance, that's a bit of a segue into the next season, if you will, where there really is an upgrading of talent that occurs. And when I say upgrading of talent, that makes it sound like that we're going to hire a bunch of new people. That couldn't be farther from the truth. you are upgrading the talent level of the folks that are there
Right.
through developing the knowledge and skills and abilities. You're also starting to promote people that are demonstrating competency and skill
Mm-hmm.
at practicing the reliability people. So you're starting to promote on a different criteria than maybe you used to. And then there are those folks in the organization that go away for one reason or another. And so as people bring in new folks into the organization, we also see the criteria for hiring be much more influenced by reliability-based competencies. So
Mm-hmm.
they see an opportunity to upgrade their people. And so they're interviewing, their job descriptions, their things that they're testing for in the interviews are much more around bringing reliability competencies in so that
Right.
they don't have to basically train and do. And those folks are really pretty dramatic because they come in playing an entirely different level of game than oftentimes the folks that were there before. And that creates an interesting dichotomy, right? So
Another tension there, right? Yeah.
very much so. And we try to be very intentional to coach leaders to reward and recognize the specific reliability based behaviors that we see from people. And so that oftentimes is from existing folks that are starting to do a good job. But oftentimes, if they've hired really an A player that has really good reliability competencies, people start to recognize that, oh, my leadership is now dispensing favor to folks that have reliability competencies and reliability skills. So the value set starts to shift in the organization, being like, how fast can I go run to the fire and get my people to put the
Fix the
fire
broken
out?
thing. Right.
Right. And it goes things like who are going to make tomorrow better. Those folks start to be more valued in the organization. So that upgrading of talent can take place really over, a 6-month, a 12-month, even a 2-year time frame, depending upon the level of turnover and local labor market conditions. And then I would say, at that point, people are understanding that there's a reliability implementation going on, right? They're seeing that their leadership is dedicated to it. We're not having trouble with people not knowing that this is occurring. They've seen people leave because they've not been able to at least operate in an environment with higher level of expectation. And then really, I would say that the last phase is really one where you're using a dashboard and appropriate metrics to drive performance higher and higher. So, much like a young athlete might be using certain measures to judge his performance on, those measures are completely different for an Olympic level athlete
Sure.
or a pro athlete. For example, as a bicyclist, I might be paying attention to like what was my average speed over the course of a ride, or maybe how long did my commute take by bicycle. But if you're a pro category cyclist, you're paying attention to watts generated at your wheel. You're looking at things like maximum oxygen uptake and caloric expenditure. So it's an entirely different range. So very much these KPIs that are put in place have to be appropriate for the level of maturity that an organization is at. So for
Sure.
example, earlier in the journey, they might be simply really struggling to get PMs completed, right?
Yes.
So PM completion is a measure, and then maybe on-time completion of PM starts to be introduced. It's because you're now saying, okay, we're getting our PMs done, but we're not very good at doing them on time. So we introduce that portion in, and then maybe in the second and third year, backlog management metrics start to be introduced into the scoreboard. I was one time working with a chemical operation that for an organization that would be instantly recognizable to all our listeners today. But they were very early in their journey, and they had a corporate sponsor that had put together the scorecard for the site. And I took a look at the scorecard, and the targets we're very much like what an organization that's been practicing reliability for maybe 10 years. In other words, like a really mature organization.
Like best in class, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I had to coach this leader to say, hey, while those are certainly targets that are probably
Aspirational. Yeah.
correct, but your folks are struggling to get machine access right now to get PMs. So would it be a win if we got 25% of our PMs done on time? So maybe that's a more appropriate metric. But this season where we're using KPIs, really at its core, what we're doing is creating healthy tension for improvement, right? So because people do not like to have red on their scorecard, and you're essentially leveraging that piece so that when you introduce new targets, it's typically red at the beginning. And as the organization tries to make the red go away healthy, right, in a healthy manner, they'll gradually get the systems. And oftentimes those metrics end up forcing us to really reevaluate the business and how we do things. But for example, I opened up our time today talking about my initial plant. One of the key metrics that we used at my initial plant was called total schedule compliance. And total schedule compliance is a metric that basically says what percent of your total maintenance labor is being used for planned and scheduled jobs, right? So if your total schedule compliance is 30%, that means that 30% of your labor is going towards planned and scheduled jobs, and 70% of your labor is going towards emergency work or unplanned work. And so in our particular plant, over a period of 2 years, we went from 18% of our labor being planned and scheduled, and we got it up to about 55%, which was a huge win, and the plant felt very different. But we also plateaued for 2 years, and we were really struggling to get out of that plateau to get to a higher level of performance. And we really had to evaluate an important aspect of our maintenance folks. We had our maintenance folks actually performing job changeover activities, and that wasn't really maintenance work. It looked like maintenance work because it was tools and bolts turning and toolboxes around.
Sure.
But it wasn't returning restorative maintenance function to the equipment. So we had to transition essentially those responsibilities to our machine operators.
Right, to
so
the
that we
operations
could,
side.
correct, so that we could get that labor back, that
Yes.
precious maintenance labor back, so that we could essentially do more maintenance work on the equipment. And it took us a while to do that because we had to come up with a different operation skill set. We had to train them and they had to get competent. But as we gradually started to get more and more of that maintenance labor back from that job changeover tasks, we were able to support bigger schedules. We were able to do more work on our asset portfolio. And that ended up being a critical item to get us up to the 80 and 85% schedule compliance. So that season where you're looking at KPIs is not just a matter at getting better at those single things. It's really like going through important changes as an enterprise to optimize your asset care. So so those 5 seasons, they overlap a little, but they're definitely sequential in this realm. That in retrospect, as I look at my clients, those are 5 sort of common seasons that they all typically will undergo as they become much more proactive. So hopefully that answers your question that you teed up for me.
No, absolutely. And I'm thrilled to hear that your plant was able to reach what SMRP, the way that you described it, the SMRP metric would be planned work, and 90% or above is best in class according to SMRP's latest metrics. So you did it. And those 5 seasons that you described so well for the season of awareness, for the season of building context and education and raising the skills level, for the season of performance expectations and holding people accountable and motivating them to change their behaviors in the new way of doing things. And then that talent upgrade and that talent retention, upskilling and talent retention is so important. It's actually in a lot of the studies that you hear today, it's front of mind for most industrial and manufacturing leaders for the next, 2 to 5 years at least. And so I just really appreciate you bringing that to life and how hands-on it is for the leaders. There's not a season that you described where you can kind of just back off and let it coast. No, it is a full-time hands-on year of weather, of seasons.
Yeah, and it's, to sort of bring it back to full circle, that really was my recollection, or my discovery very early, was this isn't just a matter of doing a few training classes and
Yeah, making the coffee cups.
yeah, and and I tell our clients a lot of times, this isn't something that the consultants come in and you spray a little consulting around. This is heavy lifting. It's going to require your best leadership, and but the gains and the payoff is really immeasurable for these organizations. So very, very satisfying work. Just not a short putt.
Well, then let's dig into that a little bit more. So, in your experience, like if our listeners are considering an improvement initiative, or they're already embarking on a journey, they're right in the thick of season 1, 2, 3, but they're not seeing the improvements that they want, or they're struggling. What 1, 2, 3, what things would you recommend, or would you counsel some of our listeners to do? Where could they start?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like an incredibly self-serving comment, but get some help, right?
Right.
Most of these leaders, the pool that they have grown up in has been a reactive based environment, and they simply don't have the knowledge and the wherewithal to lead in a manner that generates more proactivity. So whether it's reliability resources within your own company, whether it's a peer of networks and contacts that you have through SMRP, or whether it's through a consulting partner, get some help, because they will call you on your faulty thinking. So Deming has a great quote that, and I'll paraphrase it because I can't recall the exact quote, but it's essentially that true change comes from external to the organization. And that was something he learned back in Japan, back in the 50s, in his own consulting range, right? But
Right.
it's very much true today, is that that healthy tension for improvement usually comes from outside of the organization.
So for our listeners, we'll make sure we put the actual Deming quote out there for them, so that they, as a follow up for our subscribers. Well, this is excellent guidance, Paul. I appreciate your time today. If you could leave one final thought, this is always the hardest question. If you could leave one final thought for our audience, what would it be?
Yeah, this work is more of an endurance effort than a quick sprint. And this is not like plugging in RAM to a desktop and doing a simple upgrade. This is leadership energy, kilojoules of leadership energy that's going to be required by all your folks. And no one day is the make or break, but it's just an everydayness of who you need to be to generate the expectations for the principles of reliability to be practiced. So it really starts with the leaders, and the leadership transformation that occurs cascades into the organization. And that may sound a little bit metaphysical, but it truly starts with the leaders and is embodied in the plants later. So don't expect as a leader to sort of sit idly by and watch this work done. You need to roll up your sleeves and get in the thick of things with your folks.
And that, our listeners, is what we call a smart culture. So thank you again so much, Paul, for joining us. And listeners, if you'd like to explore more about this topic, we're going to post up some resources on lce.com, and we'll tell you where to go. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you all next time on Get Smarter, where we will be discussing the future of operations. Until next time, listeners, let's stay smarter, people.